Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle here with my husband and partner, Dick Price. And we are the LA Progressive. And today we have returned to a conversation with the Reverend Peter Larman. Peter is a dear friend, a frequent contributor to the LA Progressive. And I was just sharing with Peter how much I learned. We don't really have to edit Peter's work because he's a wonderful writer, but he has so many rich lived experiences. And he's written a piece that's titled An Impossible Dream, The Once and Future Labor Left. And we're going to let Peter tell us about it. Dick, you want to start by asking Peter the first question?
Sure. So apparently, this article is based on a book that a friend of yours sent you, Roy Reuther and the UAW Fighting for Workers and Civil Rights. So, and you have experience working for the UAW. So tell us about the Reuthers. Who are they and why are they important in history?
Oh my gosh. 50 years ago, nobody would have to say who the Reuthers are because they were in the national news all the time. Walter Reuther was the longtime president of the United Auto Workers Union. He became president, I think he was president by 1947, and he was president until his death in 1970 in a plane crash. Um, Throughout his time there, the union had about 2 million members and a little shy of 2 million members. And it was a tremendous force within the Democratic coalition. And I say Democratic coalition, small d, because one of the characteristics of the Reuthers, I'll mention the other brothers, but the characteristic of the Reuther view of the world is the labor movement cannot make progress apart from the community. It needs to be rooted in the community. It needs to deliver benefits for the wider community. That in turn will increase the acceptance of unionism, which has never been exactly popular in capitalist America. And so they did that. And at the height of his fame, Walter Reuther was pretty much on everybody's lips. A lot of people hated him. The FBI hated him. The companies in Detroit called him the most dangerous man in America. He was shot. He was beat up more than once. People tried to bomb his house. They tried to bomb the union headquarters. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, and he'd have weekly phone calls with the president of the United States. You can't kind of imagine a labor leader having that kind of access today. And by the way, they would call him, Kennedy and Johnson, call him for advice, not to ask for favors, because he was part of their brain trust, so to speak. The other brothers were also pretty well known, except for Roy. Now, Victor was a very brainy guy and a great propagandist for the union. Walter didn't quite trust his political judgment, and so at a fairly early time, he put Victor in charge of international affairs for the union and sent him off to Paris. And Victor came back. He came back during that difficult time I write about when the union was kind of on its back feet during the 1980s. Victor came back to attack the current leadership. For that reason, I'm not particularly fond of Victor, but may he rest in peace. He died in 2004. And then Roy is the one I didn't really know much about, which is why this book is so valuable, because Roy was, of the three of them, the one with the common touch, I think a warmer personality. He's kind of the one I would like to meet and hang out with. He was political director for a long time, but he was also the intermediary between the UAW and the civil rights movement at its height. Made many, many trips to the South. Alan, his son, and he also was the person who, in part, bankrolled and helped Cesar Chavez and the farm workers in California get started. They've named one of their buildings in Delano for Roy. I think Alan had a tough childhood. He doesn't say that exactly, but his father was out of town all the time. His mother had clinical depression, couldn't have been a happy childhood. And for that matter, I'm not sure Roy always had a happy time because Walter had the spotlight at an early time during the sit-down period. Just after that, when the union went from 0 to 2 million members to 400,000 members like overnight, in the space of 18 months, Roy wanted to have a seat on the board of the union, and Walter said, "Nah, I don't think so. There's not really room for more than one Reuther." Well, a little bit of ego in that, right? So anyway, it's a rich, rich chronicle. And when I received the book from a friend of mine, I couldn't help writing about it because it brought back all these memories and all these emotions about the labor movement.
Wow. I think my generation and the generations after mine have little to no knowledge about the stories that you talk about, even the name. I was completely unfamiliar with this family and their role in the civil rights movement. Angela Davis argues that organized labor isn't just important, it's essential for achieving real democracy in the United States. And the first time I heard Angela Davis say that, I had to sit with that statement for a while to really grasp what she's saying. And I've come to believe that that is true, that without organized labor, this country, and it's one of the reasons that this country is quickly sliding into fascism, because the labor movement has been under attack almost since the birth of the labor movement. Does this book help to tell that story, but through the lens of the personal lives of this family?
Yes, it very much does that because the Ruthers were socialists. They were committed socialists. Their father was a German immigrant. He brought that European socialist sensibility. He worked in a brewery. He started a union there. He was punished for that. They had to move a lot of times. They were poor in Wheeling, West Virginia. They were devoted to the memory of another name that should be well known and isn't, Eugene Victor Debs,
Right.
the great socialist, the martyr who was, jailed in federal prison because he spoke out against the war. In his time, he was universally hated, but a great humanist, somebody who could quote, yards of Shakespeare and stuff, and was revered in the Reuther household, where also those boys there were 5 children altogether, and all 5 children were told, "We're not haters. Black people are not your enemy. Black people are the victims of the same oppression that we suffer, only worse, on account of the legacy of slavery." And that consciousness carried through all their work. So yes, Angela Davis is right. In my sense of things, if we had a vibrant labor movement that was free of some of its flaws, which are many, together with a strong intellectual class of progressives, together with a vibrant religious progressive movement, those 3 things together would change the American left dramatically, and dramatically for the better. And there was a time where, to some degree, those elements were coming together. I don't want to paint a rosy picture because it's always been an uphill struggle. And the owners of big capital despise unions. Unions need to be destroyed. And this union, there are pictures of the beatings that the brothers took on the overpass at the Ford Motor Plant in River Rouge that shocked the nation, because these thugs, these goons hired by Henry Ford, beat the crap out of those guys. Beat them to a bloody pulp. That was in 1937. In 1948, Walter was shot in his home, shotgun blast, and bled profusely. He was saved. Victor was then shot. 20 sticks of dynamite were planted at the Union headquarters. They wanted these people destroyed. I grew up, interestingly, in rural Wisconsin, farm family, but 10 miles from the Kohler Company, which fought a 7-year war against UAW organizing there. As a kid, I didn't know what was going on. I saw these bullet holes and stop signs everywhere. And then a kid in my Sunday school class had his house firebombed because his father was a strikebreaker. So, the union was fighting for its life, and it was fighting fire with fire. We don't have labor wars like that anymore.
So you say I mean, you have hopes or dreams that the labor movement could re-energize itself, but you lay out some things it would need to do to be truly transformative. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not especially close any longer to the current UAW. Well, I'm not close at all to the current UAW leadership. It's been decades since I worked there. I was there between 1982 and 1990. Um, um, I mean, I still have a few sources in Detroit, so to speak. So, Sean Fain's UAW got a lot of publicity at the outset, and I understand now that he and I don't want to be sued for libel, but that he kind of stifled the voices of more diverse persons within the leadership of the union. I'll put it delicately. And so there's a big fight over that, and there are divisions over there. The hierarchical structure of the labor movement, and certainly at the UAW in my time, and I think even now, somewhat mirrors the hierarchical structure of the companies. And given our culture today, that's inexcusable. I mean, they need to have a much more collective approach to leadership. And some parts of the labor movement have that, but that's condition number one for a resurgence. I would say condition two is instant solidarity with the people who are at the greatest risk at any given time. So, for example, the UAW still has a lot of members in Chicago. They assemble Ford cars in Chicago. They have locals all around Chicago. They should be in the streets. Their staff should be in the streets now with Chicago under threat. When people see that, when people see somebody with a UAW jacket, right, standing next to them in the face of the attackers, that counts for something. It creates a heart message and not just a head message. And then I think third, the unions, for obvious reasons, have had a very mixed record in terms of supporting the green revolution, the transition to green energy, and it would help them immensely with younger people if they were in the vanguard of that transition, especially when it's under threat now. Obviously, some unions work in heavy construction. They build oil refineries and oil infrastructure, and there's an actual oil workers union. But there are ways to get that piece together. And then finally, I use the term that unions in America have partly of necessity been junior partners to the capitalist system. I think we need that socialist consciousness back, and we have to say, listen, just getting a piece of the action, so to speak, a slice of the pie through collective bargaining, yeah, that's needed, but that's not visionary leadership when winner take all capitalism is killing us all. So those are huge hurdles, Dick, huge hurdles toward a different kind of labor movement. And I know there are people inside the movement who share that vision, but it's not easy. I think I say in my piece, a bookie wouldn't give good odds of getting all that stuff done.
So, Peter, so you were part of the labor movement, and I've always been curious. There are people who show up, just to get a job, the workers, who don't necessarily embrace the ideology of the labor movement. The ideology being that labor must have as much power as management. I mean, these are two equal entities. And I'm wondering if that lack of knowledge could be a contributing factor as to why the labor movement seems to oftentimes embrace some of the same ways of operating as management in terms of hierarchy, and in terms of just sort of keeping people in their place.
Yeah, I think your theory is correct, which is why if they could operate from a different ethos a little bit, I think they'd be much more attractive. I mean, you hear people around Detroit or all over the country who will tell you, who work in a unionized factory, I work for the UAW. Now that's very telling, right? very telling, because they can't distinguish General Motors or whatever from the workers' representative. Not a good sign at all when people think that way. Yeah, I think you're right. But the main reason American workers, many are resistant to unionization, has to do with the individualism that's deep, deep, deep in the culture. I don't need anybody else. I can take care of myself. I'm qualified. I'll get promoted. Whatever. I'll get weekends and stuff. All that stuff that people normally think of as a decent working environment, a pension, healthcare, all that stuff was achieved by unions. The companies didn't. Again, we've talked about this. The default wage in a slavery-based economy, which is the roots of the United States economy, is zero, right? With no days off, no health care, no nothing, no worker, no safety protection, nothing. The unions did all that, but they're terrible at reminding people where these things came from. And from the 1970s onward, and this really, I say somewhat inaccurately that the UAW had to give concessions to the employers in the 1980s because of the competition they were getting from the Japanese transplants. That happens to be true. But on the other hand, these companies also use that to hammer the union back. They were at war. Again, this is forgotten history. General Motors opened 12 plants in the South and Southwest during the 1970s. Why did they do that? Those states all have right to work laws. You don't have to join a union. They were before the Japanese ever set foot here with manufacturing plants. The U.S. companies were already trying to get away from the union. It's always been like that, which is why hatred of General Motors built the United Auto Workers in 1936 and 1937.
Wow.
And ever since.
So I thought it was, and you've touched on this already, the Reuthers growing up with their parents, they were steeped in anti-racism. And I don't think it's always, in this day and age, remembered how the role some unions, like the UAW, had in supporting the civil rights movement. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, to me, that's a huge part of the story, and it's never been adequately told. I mean, it's there in the Nelson Lichtenstein biography of Walter Reuther. It's there in some of the books, but it's not. And Alan had some detail that I didn't know. For example, how hard it was on them because they took this very personally when Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot in Alabama, and Reverend Reeb, the Unitarian minister, was shot, and then Viola Liuzzo from Detroit was brutally murdered at home, and then after her murder, some Klansmen in Michigan burned a cross on the family's yard to rub it in. They took that stuff very personally, and King thought that the UAW example of using nonviolent action in Flint, thousands and thousands of people occupying those plants and refusing to go, not a single fatality. Nonviolent direct action can move mountains. And in 1961, King, who was then, I think, 30, was invited, before he was, famous. He was kind of famous, but not super famous then. He was invited to speak at the anniversary gathering of the founding of the union, 25th anniversary, at Cobo Hall in Detroit. What did he say? I mean, I put a link to that YouTube of his speech, which is a rare recording of it, in the article. He said, we look to the labor movement for how to fundamentally change things by using nonviolence. So it was back and forth. He was crediting the labor movement, and the Reuthers and the other leaders in the UAW were crediting the movement, the freedom movement in the South, for enriching the conversation, bringing new moral energy to the table. Um, everybody who knows about the March on Washington knows that Reuther sent busloads and trainloads of people to the March on Washington, sent a lot of money, spoke himself. He spoke, I think he was the last speaker. So his 9-minute remarks are not well remembered, but they're important. Walter was a very compelling orator. But then as things went along, they ran interference for the movement with the Kennedys because they had this close tie to the Kennedys. There were phone calls, telegrams, all that kind of stuff, all the time. What is heartbreaking, and I relate this, is how Reuther, partly because he was, his ego was involved, getting all these calls from the President of the United States. He couldn't part with Lyndon Johnson on the Vietnam War, whereas King had done so. And so I tell the story of the Passover Seder,
Right.
where Walter and his wife are there with their friends, the Bluestones, and Roy Reuther and his spouse, and the kids, the college kids, Barry Bluestone, who became a famous economist, and Leslie Woodcock, the daughter of Leonard Woodcock, who succeeded Walter as UNW president. They pour into Walter about this. And Walter couldn't handle it. Walter could not handle it. He got his back up. Oh no, that's gonna shatter the Union. We can't have that. It's too controversial.
Right.
Horrible that. And I say this. These were great leaders, but they were flawed leaders. In fact, Nelson Lichtenstein, in his book, treats Walter Reuther as a kind of a tragic figure. He had so much to offer, but he was also, enmeshed himself in the national power structure because he was so powerful.
Interesting. So interesting.
They elected John Kennedy. I mean, everybody who polled afterwards, the Harris poller said, without the UAW and critical parts of the electorate, John Kennedy would have been defeated, undoubtedly.
Wow.
It's so fascinating. I often talk about the centrality of race, but underneath that is, I think, something even more broad, and that is this broad conflict between the haves, the owners of capital, the elites who control wealth, land, corporations, and financial institutions, that small group of people, and then the overwhelmingly working class. This conflict between the two is fueled by these minor divisions, and maybe I shouldn't call them minor divisions that are based on race, that are based on ethnicity, that are based on gender. But these divisions help to arm the owners of capital, the elites who control wealth, land, and corporations. And I love the fact that you are bringing this discussion to the fore, because in my mind, it helps ground me in the bigger problem. And that is that corporations are leading us into this global warming situation and these never-ending wars. And I guess I would want to ask you about the book. Does the book help us to have a more broader picture of the role of labor and its relationship with race, and then the global stories like Vietnam?
I think it does. I think not all histories give you that sort of insight in terms of what might have been, what could still be, if people step up. But I think this book does. I mean, there's some devices that Alan uses that are a little tricky for people to get. And he admits that he dramatizes some conversations where he doesn't actually have the verbatim things that people said, but he does a damn good job of imagining what they might have said. And yes, I mean the use of race in particular to divide people. So the Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, who was without any question a fascist, a Nazi sympathizer, what have you, a big time hater, certainly didn't love Black people. He brought Black people in great numbers, and he had agents in the South bringing them north. And he brought them north intending to use them as strikebreakers because, he was not going to yield to the Union no matter what. Um, it's not just his so-called security department, a private police force that was beating people up. He used every single method he could use. He controlled newspapers. I mean, he did everything. It was Aretha Franklin's father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, and a couple more Black ministers who said, we are being played by this Ford guy. The UAW didn't hire them to say that. They said on their own, we are being played by this guy. They turned the tide from the pulpit and in terms of, getting out there with their own, African-American papers to say, no, you need this union. You need this union. And then when the union was recognized, there was an ongoing struggle led by some fabulous Black leaders in Michigan and elsewhere to gain full equal rights in terms of job preference, because, just getting into the union, the Black people were assigned to the foundries, the dirtiest, most dangerous work in manufacturing you can imagine, right? And essentially excluded from the skilled trades. The union fought in its negotiations to change that, to create open access to all the jobs, including the skilled trade jobs. But it was a long process. And the union, the Reuthers were enlightened, but not every local union leader in that gigantic union was as enlightened. So they constantly had to call people in and say, what are you doing? What are you doing in Saginaw? What are you doing in wherever, Janesville, Wisconsin? Dick, I wanted to say about the electoral thing. I think you have some Iowa roots, do you not?
I have some what?
Iowa roots.
Yes. I lived in Mount Pleasant, Iowa for 3 or 4 years when I was a little kid.
Yeah. Okay. So Iowa, you wouldn't think of that as UAW territory, but for years and years and years, even during my time, the best political operation in Iowa, a crucial primary state, was, guess what? The UAW. Why? John Deere, and many other manufacturing companies based in Iowa, mainly in the Quad Cities, Caterpillar, et cetera. And I remember the political director for Iowa was a genius. I mean, he knew what to do.
Yeah.
Wow.
Those were the days.
Wow.
And listen, I didn't know Alan that well, but I was very, very close to his boss during my time, who was the legislative director, the chief lobbyist for the union in Washington, D.C. And when I'd go to Washington, I'd go with this guy, Dick Warden, to Capitol Hill, and we would, every senator and representative would say, "Hey, Dick, what's going on?" I mean, they were there.
Right.
They set up the leadership. You asked about civil rights. They set up the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, which still exists. That was a creation of the UAW to bird dog legislation, and all the civil rights groups and many unions were part of it. They set up something called the National Council of Senior Citizens. Medicare and Medicaid, that was a UAW idea. They wanted universal national health care because why? One of the biggest problems that the U.S. industry has in competing with other manufacturers around the world. In this country, you have to healthcare is privately paid for. Right. In Canada, it's not. And in Germany, Japan, it's not. So that was a dream of Reuther. He could never get that. It came very close during the Truman administration, and then it faded away. Pardon my voice.
Well, Peter, this has been, as usual, a very enlightening and educational conversation. We encourage people to read the book. I think we have a link in it, a link in the article where to get the book. There are some other links in the article that we're going to be removing. That link to our glorious glossary. But there are some kinks there. But thank you so much, Peter, for spending time with us and helping us to see more clearly our past so that we can be even clearer on our future. Thanks, Peter.
Right.
Union makes us strong. Don't forget that.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content,
and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.